Hello, and welcome to Zap the Gender Pay Gap, the podcast series where we expose the elephant in the room. The elephant's name, the gender pay gap. I am coming to you from Memphis, Tennessee, located on the banks of the mighty Mississippi River. Nestled in the southwest corner of the state, Memphis is home to the blues, barbecue, and so much more. I am your host, Gwendolyn Tucker.
Thank you so very much for joining me for this episode of Zap the Gender Pay Gap. I am your host, Gwendolyn Tucker. Look for me on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and other platforms where you find your favorite podcast. I would love to be one of your favorites. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. I'd really appreciate that too. It has been a common practice to keep pay under wraps. When I entered the workforce from college a number of years ago, we were admonished not to talk about three things: religion, politics, and pay. Actually, they were terminable offenses. So guess what? People didn't talk broadly about those topics. I guess it instilled so much fear in employees that it prevented us from divulging pay data. And employers have managed to keep a lid on the type of salary information that's published both inside and outside their organizations until pay transparency advocates flooded the scene with requests for pay transparency. What's the big to-do about pay transparency? Why all the fuss? According to its most recent report, Payscale states that the intent behind pay transparency legislation is to close the gender pay gap by forcing organizations to openly advertise pay ranges and thereby enforce pay equity. Did I hear you say, but I thought we already had laws on the books related to pay equity? And you would be correct. According to history.com, the Equal Pay Act is a labor law that prohibits gender-based wage discrimination in the United States. Signed by President Kennedy in 1963 as an amendment to the Fair Labor Standards Act, the law mandates equal pay for equal work by forbidding employers from paying men and women different wages or benefits for doing jobs that require the same skills and responsibilities. The bill was among the first laws in American history aimed at reducing gender discrimination in the workplace. Have we made some headway since 1963? Yes. How do we know? By looking at progress since the law was passed. But that's not possible. Why? Because they only started tracking the data in 1979. Don't let the accountant and CPA and me go off on a tangent here, but I think I must. Let me echo Mike Tyson. It's ludicrous. Yes, it's ludicrous that it should take 16 years before someone thought it would be a good idea to track gender pay gap data. Okay, I just digress. Where was I? Oh, that's right. Talking about the equal pay law. Can you guess what the female to male earnings ratio was in 1979? On average, women earned 62 cents compared to every dollar men earned. 62%, which means the gap was what? Yes, you are correct. It was 38%. Fast forward to 2004, and the gender pay gap narrowed. Women earned 80 cents on the dollar compared to their male counterparts. It narrowed, but had not closed. Since 2004, the female to male earnings ratio has remained in the 80 to 83% range. At the time of this recording, it is 83%. Women have certainly made strides in closing the gap. 83 cents on the dollar is a far cry from 62 cents, but it is still unequal. On the most recent episodes of my podcast, I shared some of the most significant findings from Payscale's Gender Pay Gap report. There were new revelations. Some I found surprising, others I found appalling. Bottom line, the report confirms that women continue to be underpaid compared to their male counterparts. The result? There has been little movement or improvement in closing the gap. Here are the highlights, or should I say the lowlights. One, the gap between what women and men are paid persists year over year, indicating that the reasons for the gender pay gap are systemic. Since Payscale started tracking the gender pay gap, the difference between the earnings of women and men has shrunk, but only by an infinitesimal amount each year. In 2023, the gender pay gap didn't shrink at all. Two, the uncontrolled gender pay gap tells us that the distribution of high-earning, prestigious jobs in society favors men, while the presence of the controlled gender pay gap tells us that at least some women are still being paid less than men when doing the same jobs. Three, the gender pay gap persists even when men and women have the same education. Four, it is wider for women who are parents and for women who work from home. Five, the gender pay gap also widens as women age and progress in their careers. Six, it is wider for women in certain occupations and industries, as well as some states and metro areas. And seven is a highlight. The gender pay gap has narrowed slightly for women of color. One new revelation was the extent to which moms are impacted by what is called the motherhood penalty. It's defined as the phenomenon by which a woman's income decreases after she becomes a mom. I talked about this at length in one of my previous episodes. To hear more, just check it out. Another revelation that the gender pay gap is not due to a lack of education set me back on my heels a bit. Based on the data, MBAs are underpaid compared to men with MBAs. And attorneys get caught in the gender pay gap too. You'd think that with all the laws currently on the books and the fact that an independent source is tracking the data, that we would have had the gender pay gap licked by now, but that's not the case. This elephant is eating our lunch big time. 20 years, the gender pay gap hasn't budged. So in walks pay transparency. According to Payscale, pay transparency legislation began requiring the publication of pay ranges in job ads in some states beginning in 2022. This picked up steam in 2023 and is expected to expand. The intent behind pay transparency legislation is to close the gender pay gap by forcing organizations to openly advertise pay ranges and thereby enforce pay equity. Some of the evolving legislation also requires employers to share pay data internally with existing employees. Posting salary ranges on job ads benefits women and minorities by removing some of the bias that disadvantages these groups in salary negotiation. However, from their study, Payscale says it's too soon to say definitively if this effort is working. Some states with pay transparency laws show smaller pay gaps than states without, but not consistently for either the controlled or uncontrolled pay gaps. So the conclusion, pay transparency hasn't closed the gender pay gap yet. I like that. I detect a hint of optimism in that statement, don't you? The push for pay transparency has been growing over the past years as states and local governments put into place laws mandating either salary information job postings or a compensation range. States like California, New York, Washington, Colorado, Connecticut, Maryland, Nevada, Rhode Island, and the District of Columbia. According to a recent article in the Memphis Business Journal, a growing number of employers are posting salary ranges in their job ads. About 62% of organizations are publishing pay ranges in job postings in 2024. That's compared to just 45% in 2023. The increase is the result of a series of new legislation as well as pressure in recruiting new talent. It's also drawing questions from existing employees. Organizations say workers are asking more questions about pay, and almost 14% said they've had employees quit because they saw ads with higher pay elsewhere. Now get this, about 27% of the organizations surveyed said they do not address severely underpaid employees proactively. They only do so if the employee or their manager asks. Now that should make your hair stand on end. What that means is that 27% of employers who responded said they would only address an issue related to pay if the employee or their manager asked. So it sounds like you may need to get asking. But what if you don't know how? I do. And I'd be happy to assist you with that. I can show you how to make pay transparency work in your favor. To set up a call to find out how I can show you how to close your pay gap and determine if we are a good fit, message me. Go to gwendolynjtucker.com and click on contact. A link is in the description below. You can reach out to me there. Women, you work hard for your money. I can show you how to take home all of it. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of my podcast. Today, I shared some truths about pay transparency. Please join me next time to take a deeper dive on how the gender pay gap varies by state. Where you live can greatly impact your take-home pay. If you like what you hear here, please invite a woman in your world to listen into. If you missed a previous episode, please take a listen. Look for me on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and other platforms where you find your favorite podcast. I would love to be one of your favorites. I look forward to seeing you here next Wednesday at noon Central Standard Time for the next episode of Zap, the Gender Pay Gap. Until then, please be well.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Zap, the Gender Pay Gap. Please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow me wherever you get your favorite podcast. I am your host, Gwendolyn Tucker. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.